Yes, for sure. Peter Mandelson almost certainly deserves to be in jail, but the buck stops with the executive. Keir Starmer is a disgrace to his office and should resign.
But can I reassure the House, Mr. Speaker? Let me reassure the House. The process for deciding what falls into those categories will not be a political process. It will be led by the Cabinet Secretary, supported by government legal teams.
Engulfed in a political scandal that he is struggling to contain, the UK Prime Minister is battling for his political future. Keir Starmer has overnight apologised to the victims of Jeffrey Epstein for appointing Peter Mandelson as the country's ambassador to the US. But questions over the Prime Minister's judgment are not going away. But he insists he is the right man to carry on in the top job.
Victims of Epstein have lived with trauma that most of us can barely comprehend. They have seen accountability delayed and too often denied. I am sorry. Sorry for what was done to you. Sorry that so many people with power failed you. Sorry for having believed Mandelson's lies and appointed him.
Opposition parties are placing more pressure on the UK government in the wake of the growing scandal.
What was interesting yesterday was watching the faces of the backbenchers in the Commons. There was almost no support for him at all. He is deeply unloved by his own party. He was never loved by the country. He's the most unpopular Prime Minister of modern times.
Our country is not being governed. Nothing is happening. Legislation is not going through. Despite the government having about 160 majority, they're just going round and round in circles. The answer certainly is a different government.
Yeah, well, Beth Rigby has more on the fallout now from London.
Look, I've done a load of these news conferences with the Prime Minister, and I have to tell you that this one felt very, very different today. It was tense in the room, it was emotional, it was palpable. I could feel his anger, and he was really strident as he addressed the issue of Mandelson directly. He was meant to be here in Hastings to talk about social cohesion, and he did that speech after he talked about Mandelson, but he opened this clearly fighting for his political survival. And in a couple of minutes, really, of him beginning the explanation as to why Mandelson was put back into government and how he was misled, you could see that he was really not just talking to that room, but talking to his MPs and the country as he made his case for why he should still be in post as Prime Minister. That is how serious all of this is, and that was a PM that knew it, and he knew that he was fighting for survival. This is what I asked him after he gave that address. Prime Minister, we can all hear your anger, your regret, and most importantly, your apology to victims of Epstein for appointing Mandelson as your US ambassador. Some of your MPs believe you must take responsibility for this in order to restore trust in politics amongst the public.
Well, Beth, as I've said a number of times, I regret the decision to appoint Mandelson as ambassador. He was asked questions about the nature and extent of his relationship with Epstein, and he told lies.
other person who is continuing to feel the heat over the Epstein fallout is Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Questions are now being raised as to how much he knew about Mandelson's relationship with Epstein before he was appointed ambassador to the US. Quite spectacularly, he actually admitted in question time that he did know about their relationship, and he certainly knew that Mandelson spent time at Jeffrey Epstein's apartment while he was being imprisoned for child prostitution offences. So it's not a great look for Starmer. His backbenchers have now rebelled against him, and a bunch of files are going to be released around exactly what Keir Starmer knew in the lead up to appointing him as ambassador. Instead of that going through the Cabinet Office, which no doubt would be more controlled by Keir Starmer and his allies, it's going to be put through an independent committee of MPs. Starmer is under incredible pressure. There's speculation this could actually be the thing that brings down his prime ministership. And here he was in question time in the UK today, and his hands were literally shaking.
Let me reassure the House, the process for deciding what falls into those categories will not be a political process. It will be led by the Cabinet Secretary, supported by government.
So he actually had to hold his hands down to stop them from shaking. James, it just seems like the fallout from this is continuing. I don't understand. We know Andrew is over. Of course, he denies all these allegations, but the damage is done. But for Keir Starmer, I mean, this is pretty damning.
Well, for Andrew, there was a damning photo of him driving away just the other day with a massive smile on his face. And the public did not react well to that. The last thing he should be doing right now is smiling. As for Keir Starmer, there was a poll done just the other day, Caleb. 44% of Brits say they are following the Epstein story, particularly with regards the man that Starmer appointed US ambassador. 44% of Brits say they're following this story, quote unquote, closely, which is a high proportion of the population for a news story. Most news stories come and go. What is it? Today's newspaper is tomorrow's fish and chip wrapper. Not so with this story. People are really invested in it. And for pretty much half the population to say we are watching this closely does speak to the fact, as Freya said, this could be the biggest problems Keir Starmer's got. And he's had a few.
Well, today's newspaper isn't even tomorrow's fish and chip wrapper these days. It's one of the things that's gone wrong with the world, I think. But there was another poll that found not only were 44% of people watching this story closely, 95% of people in Britain are at the very least aware of this story of Peter Mandelson and his connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Like that is, if you went down the street and asked people, like, who's the Prime Minister, not even 95% of people would be able to give you the answer. So this is cutting through terribly in Britain and, of course, around the world as well. Because the defence they're now running is that Mandelson lied about just how close his connections were to Jeffrey Epstein. But how do you, in the knowledge of the fact that he had an association with Epstein, which is becoming clearer by the day, that the association was quite close. There's even photographs floating around of Mandelson getting around in Jeffrey Epstein merchandise back in 2009, which is when all of the real scandal was starting to begin, right? So in the knowledge that he had that association, knowing that the US was pursuing this stuff with Epstein and there was a high likelihood that the Epstein files would be released, he still thought he would appoint him. Now, Mandelson has got away with it for a very long time and he's floated around in politics for a very long time and was instrumental in the Blair government and you know, he's been able to get away with it for ages. But that time is up. And Starmer should have had the foresight to know that that time was coming, and he didn't, and it will cost him the Prime Ministership. And how delicious that the person who's basically leading this rearguard action against Sir Keir Starmer is his former deputy, Angela Rayner, who of course was done over because of some dodgy tax filings. I mean, it's pure British politics. This stuff happens in Britain better than basically anywhere else. But it is just an awful case of bad bad political nous.
And of course, Starmer's excuse is that, well, we did due diligence and he lied to us.
Well,
as if their due diligence is asking people a few questions and expecting that they will simply tell the truth with nothing to hide. But worse, as you said, they knew that he had a close relationship with Epstein, and so they shouldn't have taken his word for it that it's not that bad. They should have investigated everything.
They knew he was at Epstein's apartment when Epstein was in jail. I mean, to stay at somebody's house, you have to have a reasonably close relationship. The other thing that's also come out is while Peter Mandelson was business secretary, he sent market-sensitive information to Epstein on multiple occasions. Now, that's potentially something that could land him in prison. So this scandal still has a long way to run.
It sure does, and we'll be watching it closely.